Welcome to Waiting on the Trade, a monthly comics book club for people who can't keep up with monthly comics. I'm Matt Ledger.
I'm Patrick Fitzgerald Fleck.
I'm Callum Smith.
This month, we're talking about Isabel Greenberg's The 100 Nights of Hero, a story about love and brave women who don't take shit from anyone. Cal, welcome back.
Thank you very much for having me back. It's very kind, definitely. I'm very excited to get to chat to you both and to talk about this book.
So I want you to tell me, first off, how you're doing.
Yeah, I'm doing well, thank you. We're about 5 weeks into sort of vague quarantine lockdown here, and I've sort of forgotten what life was like beforehand. So it's very nice just to talk to other people and just to feel as though there's other people that I know, which is So that's very good. Does that sound like I was doing well? Yeah.
We moved across the country, so I don't really have a frame of reference for how this city that we live in now is supposed to operate. So this might just be how life is now. This just might be it. I don't know.
It's like a Twilight Zone episode where you think,
right?
it's a ghost town because it's a quarantine and it never stops.
Yeah, that's the Burgess Meredith one where he has all the time in the world, right? That might just be it for the rest of time.
Did you just stumble into a bank vault randomly? Because that's never good. That's how
Not
it happens.
yet.
Watch out. You stay clear of the bank vaults.
So then, Cal, I kind of want to ask you how you found this story and why you wanted to talk about it on the podcast.
So I first came across this story in 2016 because at the time I was living in London, and there was a very cool comic book shop there called Gosh Comics that frequently held big launch events for new comics. And this book, The 100 Nights of Hero, was one of the books that they did a launch event for. So I went along to that, and yes, that was my introduction to it. I was really impressed by sort of the stuff that Isabel Greenberg was talking about there, and I'd already read some excerpts of it online and felt very excited to get into it. I was also familiar with some of Isabel Greenberg's sort of shorter comics. This was the first one of her sort of full books that I read. I read some of her short stories beforehand and really, really enjoyed those. That was how I got into it. And then in terms of why I wanted to talk about it, it's largely because I think it's a singular and perfect book. So I think it's exciting to talk about, and I think it's I don't know. Yeah, I think she's just a really exciting creator, and I think to get to talk about her and to encourage other people to get into her work seems like one that is worth taking up.
Yeah, so I hadn't read anything by Isabel Greenberg before this, though I know you've also recommended Glasstown, which is her most recent book.
Yes, yeah. I mean, we might get onto that later, but yes, I'd massively recommend that, particularly if anybody that's been listening along to the podcast and your Die episode, if anybody that's enjoyed Die should absolutely read Glasstown, because there is a frightening amount of overlap in the two books.
Yes, yeah, from what I've seen, that is entirely true. And this household, Kat and myself, are both very interested in reading Glasstown. Kat's not as interested in continuing to read Die, but I think I can tempt her into it after reading Glasstown, probably.
Really?
But yeah, so this kind of ties into the Encyclopedia of Early Earth too, right? Her first bigger release.
Yes. So in 2011, Isabel Greenberg won a sort of comics writing competition in The Observer, which is the UK's kind of sister publication to the Guardian newspaper. It's only published on Sundays, and they do a competition every year to promote new comics talents. And in 2011, she came first place in that with a short story that was later expanded into the Encyclopedia of Early Earth, which was her first kind of full length book. That is in some respects it's set in the same sort of Earth, and features some of the same characters, specifically the god characters that you meet at the start of this book, and features some of the same locations, but is otherwise sort of this isn't a direct sequel in any other respect.
I didn't feel lost or out of the loop or anything with this. I didn't even realize it tied in until I started doing some of my background research yesterday while I was putting my notes together. So
yeah, and it's one that I definitely recommend reading if you enjoyed this. I think it's it's really interesting to sort of sit them side by side, because I think that one of the things that this book does really well is sort of taking existing folk tales and sort of putting a new spin on them, and then placing them alongside sort of new folk tales that Isabel Greenberg has created herself. And the Encyclopedia of Early Earth does a similar kind of thing, but more with creation myths. And there's a lot of kind of like biblical stories retold in this weird kind of heightened early Earth. So yeah, anybody that enjoyed this talk would strongly recommend sort of dipping their toes into that. But I read them in first chronological order and didn't feel as though I'd lost out at all in that process.
Nice. So I think that leads into one of the questions I had, which is, do you think the prologue with Birdman and Kiddo and Kid is actually necessary to this book? Or do you feel like you could detach it and the book would be fine?
I think you could detach it, but I think you'd lose something. So there's a couple of different things that I think it ties in, and I think that the biggest part of it is that through Birdman and his relationship with both of his children, but in particular Kiddo, you get a real sense of the patriarchy. I think that's fair to say, and how rubbish that is, and how I think it's basically sort of like planting the seed of just this kind of injustice that then runs through the rest of the book. And I think that it's, although you wouldn't comprehend sort of nothing less if it was taken out, I think you would lose some of the kind of thematic richness that you get with it there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely does start you off into that, like, kind of that chain of pointless and casual cruelty that's built into the system that Birdman has just like co-opted Kiddo's world into a bit. So I do think you lose it. So part of the reason I bring it up is I think, like you said, you could detach the prologue, you would lose a lot. And then the thing I want to talk about, and we don't have to do it now, but I want you guys to kind of think about it maybe while we discuss the rest of the book, is whether the epilogue is detachable or not. Like whether the book would lose out without that epilogue at the end, because we had a real big discussion in this household between Kat and myself about whether the epilogue should or shouldn't be there.
Interesting.
With each of us having completely opposite takes. So think about that as we go through, but I don't want to talk about the end first. We should probably talk about the beginning. Manfred's pretty crazy, right?
I think the point at which I decided that like this was a book that I definitely wanted to read was there's a panel where you first meet Manfred, who is just kind of like the most, just concentrated version of like toxic masculinity that I think you could hope to find. And there's a panel of him leering, and his eyes are sort of like creeping out across the page. The word leer.
The word leer is written across.
Yes, yeah. It is. No. I mean, he's a very exciting and hateable villain. I think he's one of the most like genuinely. I think it goes back to what you described something just before, Matt, where it's just like the kind of pointlessness of his cruelty. Like it doesn't benefit him at all. It's just pushing down for no reason whatsoever.
And just so unself-aware, right? Like that's kind of the thing that gets me the most about the patriarchal aspects of this, because this book, for as much as it's like, hey, the patriarchy is shit and we need brave women and people who are going to stand up to it and break it and make it into something else, like has men in it who are not shitty, which is good.
There's two of them, but yeah,
there's like 2.5 to 3, but yes, there aren't a lot, but there are some, which I actually really like. I really enjoy that aspect of it, because I think that's kind of how the real world works. Like the whole system is complicated and there are people acting within it who don't want to be part of the system but are, myself included. And I don't know if I want to go into it super much, but like a big like revelation and like thought process about that, specifically in one college class with a really cool professor, Kalia Yang. And we were reading, I don't remember exactly what book it was, but basically we were talking about the patriarchy and like how men suck. And I'm sitting there as a man and I'm like, do I suck? And I think as a man, being able to figure out that the system sucks, you might not suck. You have to act like you have to consciously choose not to suck every single day and not be part of the sucky system is interesting to me. So I don't know. I like that this book is about shitty men for the most part, but there are some unshitty men in it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you can just say not all men, Matt. You can. I'm not saying you should. I don't think you should. But I feel like that's what you're groping towards.
No, I know, but it's just like it's weird, right? Because like I don't know, have you guys had this consideration where you're just like you get super stuck on the fact that you're an actor within the system that benefits you, and you really have to make sure that you're not perpetuating it, even unknowingly.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that that's something that is represented well within the book. Particularly, I mean, I apologise for sort of skipping further ahead to the end, but where
It's whatever. We don't go in order here. Only Pat
Okay.
wants to go in order.
Hero and Cherry are being led to the tower that's going to imprison them. Sorry, the tallest tower. Thank you very much. And they're talking to a guard who is really open in his admiration for them and his sympathy for them. They ask if he can let them out, and he can't, or he doesn't at the very least. And I think it's an interesting thing where it's giving everybody shading. I mean, even Manfred and Jerome, who are both despicable, are idiots. Like they're like it's not. It doesn't make you sympathise with them. I don't think it should, but like that. I think that you can get a good understanding of why they feel enabled to act in the ways that they do, because there's just zero consequences for them, and they've just been entitled in that respect. So I think it's I appreciate the depth and the shading. I think on all of the characters in it,
because even those two are despicable, like to entirely different degrees and levels, right? Like Manfred's the shittiest one. Jerome's just shitty. Manfred's the shittiest.
Yeah. One wants to rape a woman. The other one is sort of just, complacent.
He's willing to offer his wife to be.
Yeah,
But yeah, how did you guys feel about the overall structure? Because it's quite a familiar sort of setup, right? Like the most obvious comparison is the Arabian Nights.
2001, yeah, Scheherazade. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but yeah, did you guys? How did you feel about that as a like a template and a framework for it?
I thought it was fine. I mean, it's comfortable. Like you know that story, so it just slips in there, and you're hitting the ground running.
I enjoyed it. I mean, the first time I read a version of 1001 Nights was probably when I was in grade school. We had a version in our school library. I think I've read a couple different versions since then. We recently picked up a really old version from I want to say it's 1859. No, 1895, sorry, which has like a bunch of illustrations and stuff, and that one's pretty racist, but it's an interesting edition of it. Like it's got a very cool yellow cover, and the pages are very worn.
Does it have the old book smell?
It's got that old book smell.
Yeah, that's the good stuff.
Actually, sorry, that brings me on to another question that I wanted to ask. So, Pat, I know that you read this digitally, right? Whereas I think
I did.
Yes. Matt and I read it sort of on print copies.
Mm-hmm.
And, as a print book, it's like it's a big book, right? Like it's larger than kind of like an average trade. And I think that there's interesting stuff they do with the layouts and kind of like the pages through it, but it's difficult for me to imagine what this would be like to read in digital. What was that like for you, Pat?
I had absolutely no problem with it. I actually just sent Matt a photo of it because he was also asking the same question. It's roughly, it's slightly smaller than legal paper, 8.5 by 11. And I never felt like the images or the text were too small.
Okay, that's good.
I'm
relieved to hear that. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
So when we were talking about it, and I was thinking that kind of makes sense to me in that, well, there are some pages with a lot of panels, and there are definitely interesting layouts. Like the double page spread with the bone harp, I bet you lose a little bit on.
Yeah, there were a couple double page spreads that didn't work because I had to turn the page.
Yeah, that makes sense. But outside of those, I think it actually would work pretty well because it's sort of consistent with the way that I really enjoy reading Batman Adventures on tablets and stuff, because the panels are all pretty large. Like it's a kid's comic, so it's laid out for kids. Like it's easily understandable. Like the storytelling's very clear. And I think this works the same way in that the storytelling's very clear on each page.
What did you guys think about the text that's used? I think it's used to convey storytelling. It's a person writing a story to you. But do you think it, I don't know, some parts, cursive isn't my favorite. I'm going to say it right now. And some parts, some of the dialogue I may have lost or just...
I think that might be something you actually, the digital version and having it on smaller paper might
be true, yeah.
With. Like that's probably the outside of the double page spreads the main thing, because I could see that. Like there are some words that, because it's in that cursive, like I don't know if it's hand lettered, but it looks scripty, right?
Right.
That maybe you would lose on the smaller paper size, essentially.
Sure.
So I don't think digital did you any favors on that, probably.
No, agreed.
It's it's the same kind of like lettering that is used in all of Isabel Greenberg's work, and it's very possible that like I'm just really used to it now. But I really like it. I think that it adds like a kind of specificity to it, and I think she's got such like a distinctive style as well that I think it feels weird for me to try and imagine. Sort of like
it would lose
lettering.
some of its charm if it had like Times New Roman or something in there.
Yeah, exactly right. Like
it does feel very much like someone telling you a story, like you said, Pat, too.
Yeah.
Ask because I realize that we've got half an hour, and like I hope I've picked up like positive vibes. But like, did you think about it?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I mean, it's a simple story of fairy tales about the importance of strong women and standing up to the patriarchy and being true to yourself and who you love, which, what's wrong with that?
Mm-hmm.
I also quite enjoyed it. Like I enjoy sort of the simple, stark style of it. I really like the way color is used throughout it. I think that's really excellent. I don't know. It's always interesting to sit with a book that like you say you enjoy, but you kind of enjoy bittersweetly too. Like, I don't know. But yeah, overall, I enjoyed reading it.
There's
good.
Bittersweetness to your enjoyment.
Yeah, I mean, like in that, So, do we want to talk about the epilogue? I feel like this leads directly into the epilogue for me.
Yeah. Go for it.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
All right. We'll back up and talk about like favorite stories and stuff after this. But like the reason it's bittersweet to me, right, is that the story takes place within this world where its heroes have to die, and that kind of sucks because the heroes are good. Like Cherry and Hero, you kind of grow to care for them, especially Hero. I think Cherry I don't feel as connected to throughout the book, which maybe that's one of the things I would possibly knock, honestly. But Hero especially, it's like I would like Hero to not die at the end of this book, but the way it's structured and the way it's set up and just the world that she exists in, she has to, right? But I think that's kind of why the epilogue is necessary, in that it makes it less bittersweet and more of an actual victory. Whereas Kat read the book, thought that it could end when Hero is talking at the end to Cherry about like the end of their story, and then it would be ambiguous whether that ending actually happened or whether that's still them in the tower and Hero's telling the story.
Ambiguous.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about that.
I don't know. I got the feeling that you can read it as just another fairy tale at the end, where no, Cherry and Hero actually did plummet to their death, and that's what got the townsfolk to rebel against the beaked men and overthrow the patriarchy, because these two innocent women were murdered in front of them. And we get this fantasy story about them becoming two stars in the heaven. So I don't know. It reminds me of have either of you watched Pan's Labyrinth?
Yes. Yeah.
Not recently, but yeah.
So that ending, the ending of that one can be taken two different ways, where this little girl joins her fairy family in fairyland at the end, or she dies like really sadly in the middle of a hedge maze. Like, it just depends on your perspective. So I think I got the same thing at the ending of this one. It's like Hero and Cherry lived and they become stars in the heaven with Hero's grandmother, the moon, or they died.
See, maybe I've read too much superhero fiction in my life, but I unquestionably accepted that, yes, they are now stars in the sky, and you see them in the epilogue, and it's a victory. Like, it's a victory for the world and all humankind, because that's what I want. Like, so maybe that's a lot about me.
Wrapped up. Yeah, I don't know. Well, they address that sort of with the story about Hero's grandmother being the moon and her mother saying, well, that's what my father told me and he never lied to me. But I think he was just a kind man and wanted to give me a story about my mother who he lost. Like, they address the fact that a storyteller doesn't always tell the truth. Like, that's part of storytelling.
No, I absolutely accept that the ambiguity could be there. Like, I think that that's a really, like, it's a valid take and it's an interesting take, and I'm glad that other people have it. I just say that for me, I unquestionably was like, oh yes, this world's better now. That's good.
But I think the world is better either way, right? Like, I think fundamentally it doesn't necessarily matter whether or not the ending should be taken literally, because I think that in their eventuality, like, the power of their stories has resulted in, like, fundamental positive change to, like, the world around them. And, like, so yeah, whether they're just dead at the bottom of the tower or have sort of gone on to live forever as stars, like, yeah, it doesn't change the impact or the importance of what they did. But
Yeah,
also, I think that it is literally true because I think it's a big book full of magic, and I think I wonder actually, Matt, if that's one of the things that's significant about having the prologue with Birdman and Kiddo, which I think pretty firmly establishes. What does it establish? I mean,
it at least establishes that there are higher powers and other things and things that may not actually be, like, scientifically make sense or whatever going on in this world, right? So, like, if the moon reaches down and grabs two women out of the world and puts them up in the sky as stars, I buy that because that's the world that we live in.
Well, it does that, and it also, establishes the Church of Birdman as, like, the figurehead of the patriarchy. Like, this is where everything is coming from. It's the embodiment of all the trials and tribulations that these women have to face, and that's why at the end where they say we overthrew the tower and there are no more beaked men, that's a victory, because we know that because Birdman is such a dick.
He's such a big dick, right?
He's which I think sort of, like, anybody that's listening to this and hasn't read it at this point might think that it's quite like a bleak book, but I think it is, like, one of the other things I really, really like about it is how funny it is, and I think that starts straight away as well with Birdman, who is, like, scary in his own way, but also, like, really preposterous.
Yeah, he's quite surreal, right? Like, I'm looking at this panel right now where Kiddo's just talking about, like, the humans, and Birdman just says, yes, them. And, like, it's kind of creepy, but at the same time, you can't help but laugh at it because it's a dude in a bird mask saying, yes, them.
Yeah, and I think that like, all of the book does, like, a really good job of, like, dancing that line really effectively to me. I think, like, where the people that, like, all of the antagonists in the book, or all of the people who, like, perpetuate, like, cruelty or harm, they're like preposterous and dangerous at the same time, like every single one of them, I think.
Well, yeah, the beaked men are literally guys with fake beaks on their face with, like, a string going around. Like, they're
cosplayers. They're all cosplayers.
Yeah. What I think is a comment on organized religion as well.
Oh, absolutely, it is.
So, like, I enjoyed that.
Yeah, it's really good, and even down to other little stuff as well. Like, I really like. I think one of the things that I really enjoy about this book and about her other work as well is how comfortable and, like, deft I think Isabel Greenberg is with, like, meta narratives and metafiction, because I think that there's several moments in this where you have, like, literal footnotes on the page that sort of will basically just be there for gags, but, like, often ones that are poking fun at sort of folk tale conventions, right? So, like, the magic pebble,
whether it's magic or not. Yeah.
That feels like a really good one. I think that's something else that I think is represented in the structure of the book as well, because I think although it's like, yeah, really, really similar to 1001 Arabian Nights, I think it uses that structure as well to comment on far, far, far more, and, like, the fact that it is a whole collection of stories, like short stories, effectively.
Mhm.
And like the collective mass of those adds up to something more than just individual stories as well, I think, which is good. So that's what I like about like structurally. I think it's like really ambitious and fun and clever in that respect as well. So yes, I enjoy all those things about it.
Do you guys think, just for like symmetry's sake, it would have been nice to end with Birdman and Kid and Kiddo again, just to wrap it up? Or would that be just too neat?
I think for me, I prefer to not end on them because I think that would probably have been, in a lot of respects, a much more downbeat note, because Birdman is still presumably the most powerful figure in that relationship. And there's something very dispiriting about that. And you get a lot more of that in the Encyclopedia of Early Earth as well. About, specifically, a lot of that book is about a contest between him and Kiddo with like the lives of humans. And like that's one that, I don't know. So I think maybe given that knowledge on my part, but also given that he is still clearly supreme in that relationship, I think it would have made it potentially quite bleak to revisit it and end it on that note. I think something a lot more like triumphant and uplifting to end it with humans.
Sure, but I mean, Kiddo won. Like, love triumphed at the end of the story. So I don't know. I think if we revisited Birdman and his children, I don't think it would have been him victorious or anything like that. I think Kiddo probably would have had the upper hand there. But
Yeah,
I see what you mean. They're established. He's established as being, I don't know, more superior to Kiddo.
Yeah, I mean, I would be interested to see like how the fall of the Big Brothers would be received.
Up there, yeah.
Because I don't know. Again, because there's something just so like ridiculous and sinister about him that like he's a really fun character to be around, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So okay, Pat, I've changed my answer. Yeah, I think that would be nice.
Okay, well, here, the other thing I was thinking about, though, is that it's just like it's not their story at that point. Like, I think the framing sequence is kind of necessary to establish, hey, this is the world we're in, these are the rules we operate in, this is just the framework of the thing. But the story is ultimately heroes and cherries, but I think more heroes, honestly.
I don't know, like one panel of like Birdman sulking in a corner, like huffing, like, well, this is just bullshit, and like Kiddo like smiling, like happily or like sadly, I don't know, down at them. I don't know, just something
I
like
think
to
there would
wrap
be a
it
way
up.
to do it that would work. I think like something like that, like you're talking, would be cool.
Because then, I don't know, symmetry. I don't know. It's not necessary, but
I mean, you're right in that we didn't quite come all the way out of our stories within stories within stories to get back to the top level story again.
Right. She left us in there.
I think explicitly as well, like there is like a lot of symmetry elsewhere in the book, right? Like I remember the first time reading it, getting towards the end where Hero and Cherry are in the tower and like having like a really unpleasant realization that the first story that you get told about the five sisters jumping out of the tower was that's it, the same tower, and it's setting you up for exactly what's about to happen. I think it establishes not just kind of sort of settings and rules, but also the I guess like the boundaries and the limits of the stories and like what it's capable of doing. And I think it's So sorry, my point was just that there is a lot of symmetry elsewhere in the story, so it wouldn't have felt out of place.
Going to the interconnectivity between the stories, were you surprised at all that I'm trying to think of what story it was. The Moon talks about her and her sisters during the phases story. I was almost convinced that, this must be one of the sisters of the five sisters, and her sisters are the other four. But it turns out later on that it's actually 3 of the 12 sisters of a story we haven't been told yet. I was sort of hoping it was like, that's fine, but I liked the idea of the sisters from the original book being. What did you guys think?
I guess they don't come back, right? Like
no, they become stones that dance every once in a while.
Yeah, so but I think that there's a theme of sisters, not just through this book, but through lots of other pieces of Isabel Greenberg's work, and she's talked in interviews about how it's like a significant and interesting thing for her. And like some of the other comics that she's done, or the other books that she's done, have been co-written with her sister as well.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Actually, I had something more profound to say.
No, I mean,
about this, but I think it's very obvious that it is something that she finds really interesting.
Yeah. And I wanted something more for those sisters than be stones on an island.
Yeah,
I'm trying to
but
look
then
back now to see, like, there's one panel where the stones are there and the three moons are there with them. So I'm just trying to see if it's like possible within the timeline for them to.
I mean, it isn't, because they established that it's what 10, 11, 12 from the 12 sisters story.
Yeah. Mhm.
That are the
Yeah.
three moons,
Yeah.
because they get lost in the mirror.
I guess one of the other things that I think one of the functions, though, of having the five sisters die and stay dead, and there not to be that necessarily that sense of justice, is again, I think it sets up really effectively that this isn't. It's not a world where like fairness is necessarily like a guiding force.
Yeah, and I don't know, it's kind of telling that the bit that does come back from that story is the tower that they all die from. So
I'm just saying, like,
maybe
lots
that's
of other
part of
women
it.
become celestial bodies. Why do those sisters get the short shrift?
Well, they get to become stones, Pat.
Well, I guess that's the first step towards it. Maybe, who knows? Who's to say?
Which story was your guys's, like, your favorite, like your standout story?
Cal, why don't you go first?
Me, I think it's almost certainly either phases. I mean, there's something so much that I really, really love about that, and not least just sort of how I think it's one of the most sort of like uplift. Or no, it's one of the most bittersweet in the whole thing. I think because it doesn't have the conventional ending that you're hoping for within it. Everybody gets to live together and be happy. There's like a real sense of sadness and sort of loneliness or loss at the very least at the end. And I think also because I think one of my favourite parts of the whole book is the section that you referenced earlier, Pat, where Hero's mum is talking to her about the story, and then she's asked whether or not she thinks that the story in phases is true, and her description saying that she thinks that the moon is just the moon, and that her father told her the story to make her feel better as a motherless child. And I think that's a really nice, powerful scene. I love that. And then other than that, I think probably the connective stuff as well. Like I really did enjoy everything with Hero and Cherry, and I felt very invested in them as characters. And every single time that I've read the book, it's made me tearful at the end because I feel so bought into them and so sad that they just come up against a degree of like institutional cruelty that can't be overcome them directly, at least. So yeah, those are my favorites. How about you guys?
Pat, do you want to go next, or do you need more time to think about it?
I'm good. I got it.
Oh, all right.
I like the Very Honest Harp. I like that one because it's messed up. It's really bleak and dark, and I enjoy that sometimes with fairy tales. Like they don't always have to have happy endings. And this one certainly does not. It's a warning to sisters to trust one another, to talk, and don't drown your sister, and don't let a man turn her bones and hair into a harp. And for God's sakes, don't invite him to your wedding.
I think that one's also actually my favorite. So
it's got a delightful like Brothers Grimm feeling to it, where it's like, this is some dark shit, but it's telling you a lesson, and you should be paying attention.
I think I'm just Googling this as we speak, but I think it is a Brothers Grimm story, or it's like an adaptation of a Brothers Grimm story. Bear with me, just vamp for a second.
Sure.
I mean, that makes sense to me.
And I absolutely hate that the husband, the lover in this one, he's such a douche. He's just always on to the next.
His eyes in like most of the panels he's in, where his eyes are just like
darting around.
Yeah, they're just everywhere, right? Like you get a sense of that character just from looking at his face. Like you see how shifty he is because his eyes can't, like they aren't looking.
Slide really hither and thither. You gotta watch out.
Yeah,
it's such a good line, that, isn't it? I think it's got some of my favorite. Yeah, that story's got some of my favorite moments. But his eyes slid hither and thither is really chilling. funny and awful, and it's got some of my favorite coloring in the book.
Yeah, the coloring in it, I think, is probably the best coloring in the book. There's the
water
bit where the two sisters are fighting in the river. That's all oranges and yellows and reds.
Yeah, I don't know. It's good, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just making a harp out of human remains, just like
bone harp's gonna get you pretty far.
There's a corpse of a beautiful young girl that just washed up on shore. I know what I'm gonna do with this. What? Someone's gonna watch out for that old man. He's got some problems.
Not a comic comparison that I anticipated that I was going to make, but like something I was rereading an interview with Scott Snyder recently, where he was talking about his time on Batman, and talking about like the way that he would try and make like metal moments, basically, and just just something that just like really escalates and throws it into like a wilder space than you previously thought the story was occupying. And I think that somebody just like really cheerfully getting boning a corpse and then turning it into a harp and then just sort of like wandering off whistling
Waste not, want not.
It's not really where I thought the story was going to go.
It took a turn. Like, oh god.
At some point, I'll give you the physical copy of the book to look at, because that double-page spread of the harp, just like telling truths across 2 pages in the river, and like you see the sister's body in the river, it's something, man.
Well, I can get it. I can turn the tablet sideways and it shows up. But yeah, it's oof.
Another thing that I really like about that story is that I think that there's a lot of moral nuance with the story. Like there's very rarely really uncomplicated antagonists, right? So there's like, I want to think initially, it feels like everything is set up for you to sympathise with Minori, the sort of the dark-haired sister who doesn't die in a river. And like, I don't know, sort of like the very gradual creep into killing a sister, but then also, I don't know, I don't feel like the story fully judges her or like condemns her for that. I think that like, I'm really impressed by the amount of sympathy and empathy that it maintains for every character in that story, apart from probably the handsome man who remains a jerk right up until the end and then goes off scot-free. So,
yep.
Even down to like the lesson of that, like I think one of the nice things one of the things that I really enjoy about the book is the narrating voice as well, which speaks in like a very kind of modern way directly to the reader.
Well, like it's very flowery actually at times, right? Like it is very Arabian Nights-y, old school story selling, and then every once in a while it'll just break and just be very modern and direct, which is cool.
For instance, saying lesson, men are false and they can get away with it. Also, don't you murder your sister, even by accident. Sisters are important. Which,
sisters are important.
Which is really good. And it's just, I don't know, like I think that there's so much like playfulness and range within the story. Like it's very difficult to sort of pin down like one specific tone to the book. But I don't think that it ever feels like inconsistent or incoherent, despite that.
Mm-hmm.
How did you guys feel as well about the? I mean, how did you feel about the passage of time in the book as well? Because I think that's one of the things that I remember the first time that I was reading it, like just feeling really, really engrossed in the opening stories, and sort of very naively assuming that I was going to get to see like every single one of the 100 Nights, and there's something. I remember just feeling tenser and tenser as I realised that it was rushing towards the end.
I was sort of surprised when they said, "Oh, and it's been a month since the last we've joined."
I feel like there's no way to stop every night and have the book actually be compelling.
No, yeah, I mean, I think it makes perfect sense as a practical choice, and I like the references that you get to the stories that you don't hear as well. I think it's something that like is a flex that I really enjoy in any kind of creative and sort of piece of work that I'm looking at, where people are just like tossing off ideas that I feel like anybody else would kill for. And I think that some of the references to stories that you don't hear, desperately just trying to turn to the right pages now, like even those sound just like, you know, as compelling and as fun just in like the snippets. And I don't know, like,
yeah, there's that bit where the guards mention one or two that you hadn't heard, but they also mention one you had heard, so that you're still grounded in stories you've heard, but also you are like, what about those other two? What about those other two? Give me those two.
Well, it's a really good storytelling trick to leave space for the audience to create, because like any kind of like, I don't know, horror film or anything, if they show you the monster, it's not as terrifying as anything you were imagining up until that point. And the same thing with like fantastical stories. If you leave like room for people's imagination, it just becomes that much
they'll
more
fill that
fantastic.
space.
Right.
I think it's also cool specifically for this story that's a riff on 1001 Nights, because that set of stories has been so malleable throughout time. Of like, we did some research at the house, which is mainly Kat opened up Wikipedia and read Wikipedia to me about 1001 Nights. But like since the 9th century, which is the oldest I think recorded version of it, people have been bouncing stories in and out of it to the point where at one point scholars were looking for one that actually had like 1001 stories, right? Because that's what you'd expect with a thing called 1001 Nights. But the longest version was actually an Egyptian version. So that version, which was nowhere near the original version, became like the authoritative original version for a while, until people figured out, oh, no one put 1001 stories in this because that'd be insane. So like people were just adding to it over time, trying to make it hit the right number. So just like, I don't know, it's interesting, because one of the things I was thinking about for this is like, okay, like it's cool, but whenever there's a new take on an old thing, I always ask the question like, oh, okay, well, does this take need to exist? I think the question's invalid in this case, because 1001 Nights has had takes since the 9th century of varying different styles and degrees and different storytelling elements added in, and like different stories being like the core of it or not the core of it. So I'll probably just link the Wikipedia page, because it'll do a better job of describing it than I could here. We'd be here for another hour, I feel like. But I don't know, it's like this is a story you get to play with because it's been played with since like we had stories, basically.
Yeah. I do love, just sort of in a tangent, 1001, just how like like it's a fairy tale thing. You add the one at the end, like a year and a day kind of thing. Like if there's a curse on you, it's
what Cal was talking about like those metal moments, right? Where it's like, oh, 1,000? What if we had one more though?
It's just great. Like a curse will last forever and a day. Like even if you last forever, it's still one day
it's
more.
still gonna get you.
And I'm wondering why the author chose 100 and not 101 Nights of Hero. Would that draw too much parallel to Scheherazade, do you think?
Seems possible, doesn't it? I wonder if it's also just for the alliterativeness.
Yeah, I was wondering about that too, actually. As a person who loves my alliteration, I think I would err on that side also.
So thank you very much.
I just love the fantasy of 101. Like it's 100, which is huge, but it's one more, so it's even huger.
To be fair, actually, you do get 101 nights of stories, because you've got after
their own story.
In the tower.
Yeah, there's that
exactly.
extra one.
Yeah, there you go, Pat. So it's there for you.
And an epilogue, so I mean.
It's true.
I was trying to think of other comics that this reminded me of. And I think I felt like the most like obvious comparison that I could think of was Sandman. It's like a whole series that's comic stories about stories.
I was wondering if we were going to bring up Sandman. I have it in my notes, but I wasn't going to be the one to bring it up.
Well, it's interesting. I think it's, I don't know, like Matt should be able to attest to this. Like when I was younger, like Sandman was like a really big. I think it was one of the first series that I like properly fell in love with. It's also one that I've really cooled on, I think, in the last few years. And
oh, really?
Yeah, it might be just like over familiarity. You know, like there's things that you can reread too many times, and then like the magic gets broken at a certain point.
Sure.
Like I felt like this accomplished in one volume just about as much, if not more, than Sandman did in about 10 volumes. Looking at like the importance of stories, the role of them, like, and sort of everything else that then spins out from that. I don't know. I think I appreciate like how much is packed into just one book that stands by itself as a completely discrete, sort of entity, by being part of a larger series.
I don't know. I was thinking about whether it's fair to even compare them, because I had sort of the same thoughts of Sandman is ultimately kind of a story about stories, but it takes its time getting there.
Hmm.
And so this, like, if that's what you're looking for, this does it better in a more focused way, right? I would agree on that point. But there's also not like the Pumpkinhead guy. There's not Matthew the Raven. Like, I think Sandman does a really good job still building its own world. Like, they're different things.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
Right? Like, but I do, again, like, this is one person's like unified artistic vision versus Sandman that goes through how many different artists from 1 to 75? Like,
A lot.
so I think, I don't know, like, if someone was coming cold to comics and they wanted one or the other, I would give them this every time, for sure.
I might give him that volume that's basically just a collection of short stories.
Yeah, that's fair, which is the one we're eventually maybe going to talk about on here with Mike.
One of these days.
Oh, really?
Maybe. We'll see. We have plans.
Is that Season of Mists where
They're in the tavern?
First.
Yeah.
Oh, World's End. Okay. Yeah, I like
World's
that one
End.
as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is a limit to the to the comparison with Sandman, but I think it does feel like the most obvious point of comparison anyway, in terms of stories about stories.
I'm glad you both felt that way, because I felt kind of, I don't know, I felt kind of like a poser for even thinking about it when I was typing up my notes yesterday.
A poser?
Yeah, like, sort of. And like, Sandman's a very, like, it's a Vertigo comic, but it's also a DC Comics comic, right? Like, it's got Martian Manhunter the first 6 issues.
Oh, it does.
So, like,
it's glorious.
To compare it against this, I was like, maybe my comic reach is much more limited than it feels like.
I mean, I recommend Sandman almost on the reg on this show. So
no, I know, and
every
like,
time.
I kind of figured it would come up, but I was also not going to be the one to mention it.
Well, there you go. It's been done for you.
I'm glad we got there.
I had similar things, but I couldn't figure out any other comic books that were similar. The other things I have it's not like the framework of like Scheherazade or anything. It's the stories reminded me of it. Like Pan's Labyrinth had the ending that was similar. Mirror Mask, I don't know if I think I've talked to you about it, Matt.
Yeah, I think that one. Does that one have a movie?
Yeah,
it does. Yeah.
Okay, I think I've seen parts of
the
that
Neil Gaiman one.
It's a Neil Gaiman one, where it does a whole bunch of really cool animation styles throughout the whole thing. But it's a fantastical story about a girl getting lost and this. Yeah, it's great. It's a good show. And then Kubo and the Two Strings is also one of my favorites, which also had the same feelings. So yeah, I like stories. I like fantasy stories, and this brought up lots of memories.
I've seen Kubo and the Two Strings. I feel like I have.
It's the stop motion animations with like Coraline and that kind of stuff.
You guys vamp. I need to know.
It's really good. The only downside is that it's voiced by a lot of white Westerners, as opposed to where I would like it to be Eastern voices doing this Eastern story. But that's
it's got George Takei in it, so I mean,
George Takei's in everything though.
I know, it's like, yeah, it doesn't actually. I have seen that actually. I remember it being quite good.
I think sort of beyond the kind of straightforward comparisons to something like Sandman, stories about stories and about the power of them. I think some of the other stuff that it really reminded me of was comics by Gillian Tamaki. So stuff like Super Mutant Magic Academy or This One Summer. Those are two of the ones that thinking about a lot, just because of like just the depth of compassion that it had and like the warmth that was like clearly demonstrated towards the characters, even if that didn't then necessarily translate into everything just going smoothly and fine for them. And the idea that, I don't know, it feels so pathetic towards almost everybody in it, maybe barring Manfred and Birdman.
I think for similar reasons, because like the characters are really like well fleshed out and I don't know, like good to get to know, and also it's like it's an entirely female world, and also the art style is similar in a way, especially the use of color and the hand lettering. My go-to recommendation for someone who liked this would be On a Sunbeam, I think.
Nice.
Which is,
I'm looking at a copy of that across the room at the moment. I was thinking about that in terms of like the color palette that's used. It's really striking.
Yeah, right. Like it's similar. It took me a while to figure out, okay, what book is similar enough to this, because this is unique. Like the stark illustration style, I think, is something I don't see as often in the stuff I read. But I think if you're looking for some female positive comics with a similar style, it's a sci-fi story and not a fantasy story. But I mean those are basically the same genre with technology and magic interchangeably.
Isabel Greenberg's style is like really evolved over like a relatively short career already, but like this book like is like a really interesting midpoint between Encyclopedia for Early Earth and Glasstown, and like there's a sense that everything's getting kind of like looser, sketchier, like the further into her career she gets, and like I'm really enjoying that as well. Like I think it means that there's really good, funny or like evocative moments of cartooning in this, where it's just like, although I think the figures can look simplistic in a lot of ways, like it's so expressive and so, I don't know, like I feel like it just kind of nails all of the acting that it needs to.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I don't know, I've seen various artists talk about how being able to illustrate with less lines is actually so much harder than illustrating with more lines. Like, the more lines you get, the more you kind of get to cover up anything that you made a mistake on.
And I think that's definitely like where it's going, and like this gives like an elasticity to all the stuff. Like I'm just looking at phases. There's the sort of strange swamp creatures that are chasing the moon and Hero's grandfather at various points, and the page of them sort of like dancing around the moon quarter, and I don't. Just like these weird kind of loose expressions on like through their bodies. That's just, I think it like works as well as it does because they are like really quite sort of simple, and I don't know, it lets kind of just like the limbs do a lot of the talking in a way that maybe you wouldn't do if you were like really concerned with being like hyper proportional and realistic.
So do you guys have anything that you wanted to talk about the comic that we haven't covered yet?
She draws teeth really creepy. I'm just going to say it.
Yes,
put it out there.
The panels where people's eyes are like people are staring at you
Scribbled
and their
eyes
suddenly become empty.
Yep.
All right, but yeah, I think that's going to do it for this month's discussion of the 100 Nights of Hero. As always, if you want to get in touch with Pat or myself, you can find us on Twitter as @thehypnotoad or @mattledge, respectively. You can also email us at waitingonthetrade@gmail.com and read more comics-related goodness at mattreadscomics.com. Cal, where can people find you online when you're not typing into people's Google Sheets anonymously?
I'm at Betsy Inferno on Twitter.
Thank you again, Cal, for coming on to talk with us. I really enjoyed this book. It was nice to get an excuse to order comics in a time when I probably shouldn't be spending money, but I had to. I had used the podcast as an excuse.
Very pleased to hear that, and I feel like it's good value for money as well, right? Like how many stories did you get in this one book?
100, right?
Slightly less than 100.
Join us next time when we'll be discussing I don't know yet with I don't know who yet.
Probably not Hoxpox though. Don't worry about that.